Welcome to the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Vantage Circle, the simple and AI-powered rewards and recognition platform for employee engagement.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. I'm your host, Shushmita, and in this episode, I'm having a conversation with Dr. Elia Gourgouris, who joined me last year, and we spent a great time discussing the secrets to improve employee happiness and engagement. And today, I'm so glad to welcome him back as a part of our Employee Appreciation Podcast series, because we at Vantage Circle are celebrating the month of March as the Employee Appreciation Month. So if you want to find more appreciation and happiness in your workplace, this episode is for you. Dr. Elia, known as the Happiness Doctor, is a happiness and corporate wellness expert and the #1 best-selling author of 7 Paths to Lasting Happiness, which has been translated into 5 languages. He's an international keynote speaker and has been interviewed on national and international TV, radio, and over 100 podcasts. Dr. Elia is also the founder of the Happiness Center, an organization of world's leading experts in the field of positive psychology. Let's dig in. Welcome back, Elia. Great to have you back in the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so for the audience who are listening to us for the first time today, give us a little story about yourself, and then we'll get started with the topic conversation today.
My name is Dr. Elia Gourgouris. I'm known as the Happiness Doctor, and spent the first half of my career as a clinical psychologist in private practice, and then switched over to the corporate side, working with senior leaders, leadership training and development, and executive coaching. I'm also a #1 best-selling author of a book, 7 Paths to Lasting Happiness, which has been translated into 5 languages. And last year, in the middle of the pandemic, I co-wrote another book called 7 Keys to Navigating a Crisis, a practical guide to emotionally dealing with pandemics and other disasters. And I'm an international keynote speaker. I get to travel the world, speak about corporate wellness, which I know we'll talk a lot about today, and personal and corporate happiness.
Right.
And finally, I'm the executive director of a new reality TV show called The Kindness Factor.
Oh, great. Brilliant, Elia. So coming to the topic, creating a culture of happiness with a strong employee appreciation system. The first and most important question for you, Elia, before we get on to the happiness thing, what are the top 5 HR challenges that organizations are facing these days?
So it's interesting, and this started at the beginning of the pandemic. So this comes from a study of 17,000 HR directors across the globe that includes profit, nonprofit, governmental agencies, large companies, and small companies. And their consensus has been this. The first challenge is to ensure the mental and physical well-being of our employees. Now, mind you, prior to the pandemic, this wouldn't even make the top 10. So just so we're clear, this would never make it, but it's #1. #2 is maintaining employee engagement, productivity, and effectiveness, which usually that's #1, right? That's the one thing that every company organization wants to deal with. But you know what? You can't get that until you get #1 right. And I feel like organizations, for the most part, have done a very decent job at ensuring the physical well-being of their employees, meaning, social distancing, working from home, just taking those precautions to keep their businesses and organizations open. But they have really struggled with trying to ensure the mental well-being of their employees, which does contribute, especially now, to employee engagement, productivity, and effectiveness. Right. And that's something that I talk across the globe a lot, is about, how do we corporate and mental health, right? The third challenge is creating just an ecosystem around working from home, this kind of hybrid. I mean, the workspace has totally changed in the last 2 years. And, the fourth one is adapting to the new normal, facilitating change and shaping culture. We'll talk a lot about today about shaping a culture of appreciation. And I don't talk about the new normal because I feel like that's overused. When I talk with senior leaders, we talk about the next normal, meaning what's up ahead 6 months, 12 months, 18 months down the line, to anticipate what's coming, so we're not surprised. And then I feel like the last thing, of course, for employees is to protect their employment and preserving their livelihood. I think, but anyway, back to appreciation. Let's get started.
Right. So you have mentioned the 5 challenges that ensuring mental health and physical well-being for the employees, then maintaining employee engagement, creating an ecosystem around for the work from home thing, and adapting to the new normal, and then protecting employment and preserving livelihoods. So the second point, that is maintaining employee engagement and productivity and effectiveness. So most of all, employee appreciation feeds employee engagement, which leads to increased happiness. So what are the top benefits of focusing on employee appreciation that you would like to highlight today?
Well, first of all, let's talk about employee happiness, because that's a direct result of employee appreciation.
Right.
What is the benefit of having happy employees in your organization? And the benefits are multiple. Number one, they're better teammates. Meaning, because when people take care of themselves and they practice great self-care and they're strong mentally and emotionally and their batteries are full, they're able to help, their teammates because they're already full. So number one, and that sometimes is forgotten, that happy employees are better teammates. Happy employees, on the other hand, are also more creative. They're more innovative. As a result of that, they tend to be more productive. And obviously, when you have more productivity and engagement, they're more effective in what they do. And in the end, that impacts the bottom line, makes the company, the organization more profitable. So there's a direct link, step by step. And the outcome, of course, is a better served organization or company.
Right. Yeah. So employee appreciation, Elia, I have gone through some of the research, and there is also a statistic that says that 69% of employees would work harder if they felt that their efforts appreciated more. So they'll even be more satisfied if they believe their work is valued. So to what extent do you think a simple appreciation is linked to workplace productivity and satisfaction?
I mean, I'm glad that you asked that question, because it is actually that simple. But just because it's simple doesn't mean that it's widely, spread throughout organizations. What is appreciation? Appreciation is a form of kindness, right? Mm-hmm. What is the cost to appreciate another human being, whether it's in your own personal life or in an organization? What does that require? Almost nothing other than a desire to open your mouth and say something nice about somebody else. It doesn't cost any money. It doesn't really cost a whole lot of time. But what it does mean is that you see somebody doing good work and you take maybe that extra 30 seconds or a minute, where you say, I really appreciate you working so hard. I really appreciate what a good teammate you are to your fellow teammates. I really appreciate the fact that, you're always on time, or when we need something, you show up, and you show up big. Okay. I just appreciated somebody in 5 different ways, and it took less than 30 seconds. That's how easy it is. And yet the benefits are so profound. So to me, it baffles me when I go into organizations that they take shortcuts when it comes to appreciation.
Honestly, that's interesting to think about, actually, Elia. So apart from a simple thank you or any appreciation in words, what are your views on events and rewards culture, or maybe team building activities?
I think, from what the studies are showing, especially now, we're living in this, not exactly post-pandemic yet, but we're going to get there at some point. The workplace has changed dramatically. And at least here in the United States, I can tell you, they're calling this the Great Resignation phase, where people are leaving organizations or companies in droves. And why is that? Because over the last couple of years, having worked from home a lot, or having had this hybrid, they've had the time to ponder. People have taken the time to think about what's truly important in their lives. And what's really important in their lives are relationships. Right. People want to work in an environment where they feel cared for, appreciated, supported, loved even. I know that may sound like a strange word to say when it comes to the work environment, where people want to feel like, there's a sense of belonging and that I matter as an employee, regardless of where I am in the organizational chart. And if they feel like they don't matter or they're taken for granted, a lot of people are saying, I don't need this. I'm going to go and work somewhere else or work for myself or do something different. They're no longer willing to compromise that, I guess. And I see that as a very positive thing because it's a grounds up. Which I like that. And it's forcing perhaps senior leaders to look at their companies and organizational structures and culture. And especially when you start losing good talent. I mean, and this is unfortunate, right? Why does an organization have to wait until they lose some critically important people in the organization before they say, something's wrong, we got to do something, because our retention has gone way down and we're losing these wonderful performers, people, individuals, and they're leaving us. So I have a solution to that. Most organizations, when somebody leaves them, they do an exit strategy, right? HR meets with them and they sit down and like, okay, Elia, why are you leaving us? And so on. And they have, well, guess what? Exit strategies are too late. Because by the time you get to that point, your talented employee is already out the door and has found something else. When I work with organizations, I infuse in their culture something called stay interviews. Now, you might say, well, what the heck is a stay interview? A stay interview is something that happens throughout somebody's employment. It starts from the onboarding process. When you first start out, within the first week, you have a stay interview 1 week into somebody's new job or position. You have another stay interview 30 days into it. You have another one in 60 days and another one in 90 days. And during those stay interviews, you're having a heart-to-heart discussion. It could be over lunch. It doesn't have to be necessarily formal. But you're basically asking them in really feeling the pulse of that new employee, where they promised certain things while they were onboarding or when they signed the document to come on board that have not been fulfilled. Right. There's no worse thing that we can do as an organization is to overpromise and underdeliver. We overpromise when we're hiring somebody and we're so excited to get them. And as soon as we sign them and we give them a desk and a computer, we don't follow up with those promises. When that happens consistently, guess what happens? Eventually, you end up having an exit interview with that person. So in order to avoid all that, we want to have stay interviews consistently. 1 week, 30 days, 60, 90 days after you hire somebody else. Because if there's something amiss, if we promise and they did and we haven't delivered, we should know sooner rather than later and correct that. Because no organization is perfect. People make promises, sometimes they make mistakes and so on. But we want to be able to address them, to listen, because part of the appreciation, by the way, isn't just verbal. Part of appreciating somebody else is the listening part. Listen to what's going on in their lives, right? And then act upon it.
Brilliant. The stay interview that you mentioned, Elia, is something I think I am going to convey to my HR.
Yeah, and I'm happy to teach them how to do it. I mean, there's a specific way to do stay interviews that are not intrusive and they're not being interrogated, right? It's a more supportive, loving appreciation, but it's also saying, hey, we made you certain promises. We just want to make sure that they're being followed. And if they're not being followed, if there's a block somewhere, let us know so we can correct it.
Brilliant.
That shows the employee that, this company actually walks the talk, right? They're not just, because how often do people get so excited to get hired and then within 1 or 2 weeks, they're like, man, I think this is a mistake. This is not what when I was interviewed, everybody was all smiley and happy to have me and so on. And now that I got into the trenches, what I'm seeing here is like, they're not walking the talk. Right. So, and people get disillusioned and discouraged. And eventually what ends up happening, they end up having an exit interview. Well, that's too late then. Exit interviews to me are like so dumb. It's too late at that point to correct something. You've already lost
organizations hardly work upon it later on when the employee leaves it. It's just like a formality.
Right, exactly.
So moving forward to our next question, Elia, that appreciation is a fantastic method to improve the interaction between employees and managers. Employees also believe that being acknowledged by their managers or their superiors, it improves their working connections, especially peer-to-peer appreciation. It's a very genuine method of motivating employees since it fosters a culture of support, collaboration, and achievement. So how can we encourage our employees to acknowledge each other's efforts?
The thing is that it has to start from the top. That's why I work with the C-suite, with senior leadership and senior HR directors, right? We have to show up differently as senior leaders. This is more true now than it has ever been, especially before the pandemic. Over the last couple of years, and I've coached HR directors when their work was really, the economy shut down, people are working from home, they're not coming into the office. So HR leaders check in with their teams, right, throughout the week in their little camera, on a Zoom call. And my message to them is, when you check in with your employees to see how they're doing, and you haven't seen them maybe for a month or 2 or 3 weeks or whatever, don't look at the camera and ask them, how are you doing today? That's a wrong question, because most people are not going to be honest enough. They're going to just look at the camera and say, fine, and they're going to be lying to you. Close the door, lean into the camera, get your face like right up to the camera and say, listen, how are you really doing? And how's your family? How are your kids? What can I do? What can we do as a company or as HR to help and support you? And then comes the extra credit as a senior leader. Asking them genuinely and empathetically, how are they really doing, goes a long ways. But I think what goes even further is for senior leaders to show up with vulnerability and authenticity and look in the camera and say, you know what, by the way, I've been really struggling too. Now that takes some vulnerability, right? Sure. To be that kind of honest to your employees and say, our kids haven't been able to go to school for 6 months. They're driving my wife and I crazy. It's been really hard here. I've really missed being in the office and seeing you guys. I've been kind of down and depressed myself, because you can't look at the camera and ask, how you doing? And pretend that everything is okay in your life and ask them to be vulnerable and be open towards you. That doesn't work anymore. So either we show up as senior leaders with far greater authenticity and vulnerability and honesty and transparency. I like to call that practicing HOT communication, HOT, which stands for honest, open, and transparent. And when we practice HOT communication, then miracles happen. As senior leaders, as HR leaders, we need to practice HOT communication with all our employees now.
Brilliant. That's something very new that I'm listening to, and our listeners will be very glad to know that. So any final suggestions to our listeners, Elia?
You know what? I feel like we've been through a lot the last 2 years. We're humanity. We've gotten our butts kicked. I mean, we have, the pandemic. We have the mental health crisis where depression, anxiety, and stress is, at record levels. We have a lot of upheaval in the workforce. But one thing that I have noticed, even in the midst, and I'm an optimist, I believe that this too shall pass, even though we've gotten our butts kicked for the last 2 years. And it's lasted a lot longer than anybody, including myself, I thought this would last. What has come out of it is that people are living I believe, a more mindful life. It's almost like some big finger from the sky came down upon humanity and pressed the pause button, like humanity paused, right? Which has never happened before, because up until then, everybody was working like, the rat race, basically. Well, now people have had time to think, to ponder, they want to live lives much more mindfully and consciously. Which means what? They want to connect with other people deeply, deeper than before, not the superficial stuff. They want to spend more time with their loved ones. And, which means that and this comes from a very recent study too, one of the greatest sorts of appreciation of an organization towards their employees is flexibility in personal time off, flexibility in working a hybrid model, working from home as much as possible. And companies that allow that seem to have their employees really appreciate it. Doing business as usual in the pre-pandemic world no longer works. And if you're stuck and you say, well, I'm not going to change, we were successful before the pandemic, we're going to keep going that way, you're sadly mistaken, because organizations that are stuck in the old ways are falling behind and they're losing talent left and right. On the flip side, organizations that are flexible and adaptable and put people first, not just in words, but not just in mission statements, but actually show up with greater appreciation towards their employees and reward them in a variety of ways and listen to their employees and what they need, they are going to be much, much more successful and not only just survive this crisis, but actually thrive in the midst of the crisis.
Well, thank you for those words, Elia. Finally, how can our listeners reach out to you?
Go to my website, dreliagourgouris.com, or through LinkedIn. Elia Gourgouris, PhD, the Happiness Doctor, and I would love to connect with you. And thank you for your time.
It's been a privilege and honor to have you here, Elia. Thank you so much for being such an amazing guest twice on our platform. I look forward to have many other sessions with you, and thank you for everything that you are doing.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. Please do subscribe to Vantage HR Influencers Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and our YouTube channel for new episodes.